Hi there, guys. I just wanted to give my take on this mad Union Jack story that's been in the news over the last couple of days. So I'm sure everyone is familiar with the story, but essentially, a young girl was prevented from giving a speech at her school about Britishness and about her British culture. And she was told that, quote, it was not for her as she gets to celebrate being British every day. So there are so many elements to this that are worrying, and I wanted to give a leftist perspective on it because all I've seen so far is comment from the usual suspects on the right of politics. I'm going to preface my comments here by saying that I generally think of myself as sort of taking a common sense position on most things, but I'm sure if anyone asked me questions about my actual political beliefs, then I would be characterised as, hard left or far left. And I only mention that because I wanted to draw a distinction between my political views and those on the liberal left, and that's going to be important later as I discuss this story. Going back to the actual story itself, in the current political climate, for the school to do this, it's just a cock-up of absolutely epic proportions. Firstly, he did a cursory Google search on the school, and it says that the majority of pupils at Bilton School, which is the school in question, are of white British background. So when they told the pupils to arrive at school, dressed in outfits which reflected their nationality or cultural heritage, did they really expect over half of the pupils to just turn up in normal school uniform? Like, it's genuinely baffling what they were thinking about with this Culture Day idea. I'm going to try and put myself in the shoes briefly of the people who thought this up. So if I'm being generous, I'm guessing what they were trying to do was emphasise that as people of different backgrounds, we might wear or do things slightly differently at home, which would then potentially lead on to a wider discussion about, various cultures, various countries across the globe. But that's being generous, to be frank. And so then on to the wider point then about why you might do this or even think it was a good idea. My view is that this is sort of indicative really of your classic sort of liberal mindset. So it's a general sense that it's well-meaning, but without any understanding of anything other than performative identity politics and sort of virtue signalling, really. And I've no doubt that this crazy idea was cooked up by the senior leadership team in the academy, that probably most of those people in that senior leadership team are all or mostly white middle-class liberals. This is probably a story about them being able to put pictures in their yearly report showing how progressive and diverse their academy is. But then to take it a few steps further, so this has got a very strong smell of what Edward Said called Orientalism. And that's the idea that you have a sort of paternalistic view of people from different cultures and backgrounds, and that people of different cultural backgrounds are somehow exotic and mysterious, whereas white people are somehow seen as superior and rational. But interestingly, I think it also somehow highlights their disdain for Britishness or British culture. The comment that you get to celebrate your culture every day is so tin-eared, it's just untrue, really. Do they really think that trudging to school in the rain every day and watching their mum and dad struggle with the bills is British culture? There is no daily celebration of being British in this country. What are they talking about? It's just total nonsense, isn't it? And then to take this even further, I'd argue that this is also the mindset that led well-meaning middle-class professionals to avoid asking hard questions about child sexual abuse by non-white grooming gangs. The notion that they might be labelled racist if they picked up on any ethnicity or cultural issues. And that was at the heart of why those girls were not believed or why the perpetrators were not brought to justice sooner. It's the same principle. It's just wishy-washy ideas and a lack of thought or scrutiny about the important issues at hand. We live in a time where people think that having your pronouns in your email signature, where the BBC having a weather presenter with one arm and having a culture day at school is seen as progressive, while the real injustices in our society go totally unchecked, whether that be wealth or regional inequality or racial inequality. But for me, this is just another nail in the coffin for liberalism, centrism and performative identity politics, really. And the whole story is just profoundly depressing, really, because there are loads of important themes and issues here. And that's before we even get to how this is used or will be used, by the right wing in this country, who I know have already hijacked the issue and, labelled it as some sort of cultural Marxism or similar. So it's a really interesting story for many different reasons. And I just wanted to give my perspective on it, really, to add to the mix. But anyway, thanks a lot, guys. I'll see you next time.